Hey everyone, Matt from Crank Engineering. Something a little different today. I got an email from Lauren from Ridewell. This is her site here, and she's got a great site about motorcycling and she builds her own custom bikes. She's awesome, check her out. And she said, hey, why don't we do something about workshop safety? So this video is going to be accompanying a written article that you'll find on our website, and let's talk a bit about shop safety. So I've got a list of 5 things that you might want to have around if you're a beginner wrencher on your motorcycle. So let's take a quick look at the list. Number 1 definitely would be rags. So you can buy rags from your auto supply stores or your hardware stores or from other places, but I generally just keep my old t-shirts and then cut them up and use them as rags. Now when you're working on a motorcycle, you're generally going to spill oil, or you're going to have grease on parts, or you're going to spill fuel, whatever it might be, so you really got to mop that up. So rags is just a quick and easy way of doing it, and it's a pretty cheap way too if you're recycling your old t-shirts. However, if you are soaking up oil or brake cleaner or anything that's flammable in a rag, you really need to think about what you're going to do with it when you finish, because if you leave a rag soaked in fuel around your shop, then you're creating a fire hazard. So what I tend to do is, once I'm finished for the day, I'll grab the rags that I've used and I'll put them in a plastic bag, tie them up to seal them up, and then I'll dispose of them there. So you might have to check with your local regulations, because putting oily rags into landfill sometimes isn't considered a great idea. So just check what your local requirements are before you dispose of your oily rags or your oil as well from your motorcycle, and just make sure you stick to the local regs. Number 2 on my list would be gloves. And the main reason I like to wear gloves is, well, 2 reasons. Firstly is prevent my hands getting injuries. I'm always getting cuts and scrapes and I'm bleeding all over my shop on a pretty regular basis. So where I can, I like to keep my hands protected with gloves. The other reason for gloves is I hate handling oily, greasy parts then having to touch a clean bike. So if you're using gloves, you can keep the gloves on for the dirty work and then take them off quickly when you're doing the clean work. So a couple of suggestions from the gloves department. They call these Rears gloves here in Australia. I don't think they're very useful. They're a bit loose. You've got no dexterity when you're using those, so I don't use those for motorcycle work. These are quite heavy mechanics gloves. This particular brand is just cat ones I found at a hardware store. Quite heavy. I do use these quite a bit when I'm working on steel or with metal, and that protects my hands from cuts. But again, not a lot of dexterity because of the thickness of the fingers. So not the first choice maybe for motorcycles. These type are a little better. They're more of a disposable mechanics gloves, and they have got this sort of rubberized coating on the fingers, and they are quite thin. So these are great. I like to wear these around if I've got a pair handy. They're a few dollars a pair, so they get a little bit expensive if you're going through them quickly. And lastly, which is a really quick and easy and cheap way of doing it, is just the black nitrile disposable gloves. So if you're doing a chain lube or you're draining oil and you know you're going to get dirty, you can just throw a pair of these nitrile gloves on and then chuck them out straight away. So you can get a box of these from the hardware store. I got these in the painting aisle, so that's a supplies for painting. So nitrile gloves would be my number 1 pick for protecting your hands and your parts on your bike. Number 3 on the list would have to be protecting your eyes with some sort of safety glasses. Now, I'm not the biggest safety Nazi in the world, but I have worked in a lot of industrial workplaces, and I don't really hold my own shop to some of those standards because it's just me in here and I take responsibility for what I'm doing while I'm in my shop. But I did have an uncle once lose an eye from using an angle grinder, and a sliver of metal went into his eye, so he lost an eye. So I'm a little bit paranoid about my eyes, and I don't want to stop riding motorcycles because I'm blind. So you'll generally see me in the shop with a pair of safety glasses either on or on my head, so they're always with me at all times. So, you know, these are really cheap. You can get them on special at the safety stores for a couple of dollars a pair, and if they get all scratched up because you're dropping them or whatever, you just chuck them out and use another pair. So I keep a few of these lying around in different places around my shop so I can grab a pair quickly and easily. If I'm outside, I'll often be wearing tinted ones, which are great as well. Except if you're under a car or under a bike in the shadows, you really can't see anything when you've got tinted ones on. So depending on the job, I'll often have 2 pairs around. Generally, I'll have the clear ones, you know, close to hand. So number 3, protect your eyes, safety glasses. Number 4 on my list would be keeping the floor cleared up. So mops and brooms, when you're working in your own shop, is probably a good idea. So if you can keep the oil off the floor, you're less likely to slip in it. And if you're keeping the oil and the dust, and sometimes, you know, in my shop I do a bit of woodworking as well if I'm making a jig or making something related to the bike or something related to the house. There'll be a lot of dust around too, and that's wood shaving. So a couple of reasons: one, for slips and trips and falls and things on the floor. If it's oily, that's not going to help you. And secondly, if it's wood shavings, it's a bit of a fire hazard. So I generally sweep and mop my floor in here pretty regularly. And that just helps both the safety aspect from sliding around on the floor and also a fire hazard as well. So keep the floor clean and reduce your chances of taking a tumble and knocking your head perhaps, or setting fire to your shop, which is also a very bad idea. Number 5 on my list would be a first aid kit, and I'm just going to cut to some footage now of my first aid kit, which is mounted on the wall about 10 steps from where I'm recording this video. And as I said earlier, I'm generally cutting my hands or something on a regular basis, not by intention, but just probably by either a little bit of carelessness, or I haven't been able to identify something that's going to cut my hands before I did something dumb like pick it up. So that first aid kit's pretty well stocked with saline solutions, great for just washing out cuts and things. And then I've just got a bunch of band-aids and small bandages. I really haven't used anything more than saline, band-aids, or whatever you call those things, that's a proprietary name, and the tweezers. So if you get a splinter, either of metal or wood in your hands, it's great to have a pair of tweezers handy so you can fish it out without having to go to a whole lot of extra trouble. So that first aid kit's very close by. And I have been fortunate in my working career to have had first aid training, so I'm pretty self-sufficient, you know, fishing splinters out of my own fingers and patching up minor cuts. I've only had one trip to the emergency department when I split open a fingertip with a chisel. So, you know, you've just got to be a little bit careful, but also be prepared in the event that you do have a mishap and you just have to do a little bit of self-repair. So Lauren's next question was about the safety hazards that beginners might overlook when they're working on their own bikes. And the way I look at injuries or safety in a workplace is really about your ability to identify the hazards or the things that are got the potential to hurt you. And when you're new at all of this, you don't have any idea what sort of things are going to hurt you. So you only learn that either through, I don't know, watching videos or reading articles or being trained, if that's what happens in your workplace or in your career. So hazard identification really is the biggest issue with new or home trained mechanics. So you've got to understand that, okay, so this motorcycle's sitting on a lift at the moment or on a platform. It's got potential energy. If it falls off, it's going to hurt somebody. We've got nuts and bolts that have got stored energy because they're tightened up. So there's a whole lot of hazards that you can find in a workshop, especially in your own shop, that potentially could hurt you. So I think what we'll do is I'll make a bit of a list of those, and I'll put a link somewhere around the video and you guys can click that link and download that list. And the objective there is just to get you familiar with some of the things that could hurt you in your shop, and hopefully that'll jog your memory before you're about to start a particular task and just give you a chance to think about it and go, oh, maybe that's not the best way to do it because I'm likely to hurt myself doing it. So hazard identification, so it's all those mechanical hazards like potential energy, things falling off. You've got rotational things like chains on motorcycles, or you might have a drill or an angle grinder or something like that. So all those things you can get entangled with are a bit of a hazard. So let's just stick with a list that I'll put together for you guys, and you can download it from the link. Okay, the stuff that I do in my shop that I pretty much consider non-negotiable is obviously I mentioned the safety glasses, and I am a bit paranoid about my eyes, so I generally have safety glasses on all the time. Unless I'm wearing a welding mask or something, then I might take them off. But if I'm working around the shop, then I'm generally going to have safety glasses on. So the main issues are stuff flying around the air. So if you're using an angle grinder and there's sparks or metal flying around, or if I'm using a striking tool like a hammer and I'm hitting metal, there's a potential chance, slim chance, that something's going to fly off, and if it ends up in your eye, that's going to give you a bad day. So, you know, for the cost of these things, you know, I just keep them on me all the time. So safety glasses, number one, absolutely non-negotiable in my shop. So the closest call I've had in my own shop was quite a few years ago now, and I was using a large 9-inch angle grinder to cut through a very large section of steel, and I had that steel on the ground, and I had one foot in front of the other, and I was using the angle grinder to chop through that steel. But what I didn't realise was that all the sparks coming off the angle grinder were going right towards my back leg, and I had a set of coveralls, cotton coveralls on over my work pants. And because they're quite loose, I couldn't really feel anything for a while, but this piece of steel was quite thick and it needed quite a bit of work. So I was cutting for a few minutes, and then I thought, well, my leg's starting to get a bit warm now, and I looked down and I was on fire. So there was enough sparks that come off the angle grinder, and it hit the cotton coverall that I was wearing, that it set the cotton on fire. So clearly I stopped the angle grinder, and I can't remember what I did, whether I patted the fire out or whether it self-extinguished. It didn't burn through my work pants and didn't burn my leg or anything, but it sure scared the hell out of me when it happened. So that's probably the closest I've come to having a really serious injury in my own shop. And now when I'm using an angle grinder, I'm always very, very conscious of where the sparks are going. So I generally won't be using an angle grinder in this part of my shop, mainly because I have got fluids and chemicals and things on the shelves here. If the bike's here, there's oil and there's fuel around the bike. So unless I really, really have to, I won't use an angle grinder in this space. And if I do, I'm very, very careful about where the sparks go. So my hot work area is in the other side of the shop here, and you'll see that in my shop tour video. But that's a place where I'm quite happy for the sparks to go bouncing off the walls and into the air and everything. So I do use an angle grinder much more carefully now, and I'm also always very conscious of which direction the wheel is throwing the sparks, and generally we're aiming to get those away from your face or anything that's on your body, like your clothes. Okay, so there's one thing that I see quite a lot on YouTube predominantly with other video creators and mechanics and makers and DIY guys, and that's to do with angle grinders. I haven't been able to figure out why people have a propensity, is that the right word? Propensity to remove the guards on angle grinders. So these are two identical Milwaukee 4-inch grinders, and I've left the guard on this one, and I've taken it off this one so you can see the difference. Now I think it's possibly because you've got a little bit more flexibility in how you use the grinder and what side of the wheel and getting into tight spaces. But if you're holding the angle grinder here, there is not much between that spinning disc and your fingers. And likewise, if you're using the handle, and I see a lot of people who've taken the handles off too, you know, there's like 10 millimeters there between my finger and the disc. Now, these discs don't discriminate between steel or bone. So just Google angle grinder injuries and have a look at the images and see for yourself what happens. But I'm guessing it's because people like the access to the wheel, but I just don't do this, and I always try and find another way of making the cut or positioning the workpiece or my hands or the grinder so that we don't have a chance of slicing open fingers or anything like that. So kids, be careful with angle grinders. And look, again, I'm not a safety Nazi. You can take the guards off if you want. I just haven't figured out why people have a tendency to do that. So look after your hands and your eyes and everything else, because if you make a mess of those, you can't ride any of these. So thanks for watching. Check out the article on Lauren's website, we-ridewell.com. And if you've got any questions, put them down below and I'll see you later.